Well, Todd, we talked a couple of weeks ago. You said a 3-3 start would be a successful start for the Falcons.
Yeah.
They're 3-3.
Yeah, when you looked at the first 6 games with the new coaching staff and all the changes and the quality of the opponents, yeah, if you can come out of it 3-3, you had to count yourself blessed, I guess. And certainly to make one of the 3 a win over Toledo makes it even better. And now the team's got to turn the page, and that's one of the toughest things to do. Coming off a big win in conference play, the very next week you're back in the MAC again. So, Central Michigan isn't impressed. They want to come in here and get a win. And, I guess you could say it's good to be back at home again, but even that could be a double-edged sword. Might be better to go on the road as far as turning the page. So this team will be challenged this week in a lot of ways, and I think the number one way is mentally. That Toledo game is not going to mean a thing come Saturday against Central.
We'll get into the chips in a little bit, but we can still bask in the afterglow of the
Yeah.
Falcon victory. We have seen a lot of battles of I-75s over the years. I don't know if we've ever seen a game quite like that, down 21-0. Bowling Green's 74-0 when trailing by 21 points, and that's where they came back and won.
Yeah, I think there were a lot of factors. First of all, the crowd obviously helped keep the team in it. The touchdown right before half was mandatory. Without that play, they would never have won that game. And then, Toledo made a few mistakes, but I think Bowling Green forced some mistakes too. The fact that the defense clamped down in the second half, Toledo's offense was really bottled up. The first half, they missed a couple scoring opportunities, but in the second half, they didn't have any. And when the defense had a chance to make that big play, they came through. The sack in the end zone, the interception at the end of the game, those are those what coaches always talk about, make the big play when it's there, and Bowling Green did. So a lot of factors came together, as it would have to make a comeback of that size.
Certainly one of the factors. Drew Pine injured, so they had to go to Lucian Anderson III, and they had a game plan that really protected Lucian Anderson making his first career start and didn't ask him to do too much. Now moving forward, they might ask him to do more.
Well, I think that's something that gets lost in how that game was won, too. I got to give Coach George and his staff credit. They came into the game, if you listen to what he said, we had to minimize the mistake opportunities for Lucian. And I think that was born out of the Ohio game. Remember when Drew got hurt, Lucian came in, we had 3rd and 12 or something, and they dropped him back to pass, and he got crushed and fumbled. I think they saw that and said, look, against Toledo, and that's partly what happened in the first half. They were in 3rd and long too much, but they didn't give in to, all right, let's drop him back and throw, because it's not in his wheelhouse right now. That discipline to the game plan paid dividends. Of course, it might have gotten ugly if all the other stuff hadn't come into play, but the offense mustered just enough, and a well-timed, well-executed trick play swung the whole game.
Eddie George was blunt in his assessment of the defense and of the MAC Defensive Player of the Week, Gideon Lampron, in the first half. Said they weren't good. Second half was a much different story. They just simply simplified things.
Well, I think, too, we knew Toledo was explosive coming into the game. And, until you play somebody, it's hard to get the measure of them. Toledo went right down the field the first drive like it was going through butter. And that continued for a little while. But I think once the defense got their footing, they felt, okay, we can do this. We can play this type of defense. They got confidence. And then the D-line played great. Toledo had a lot of yards rushing, but there were no explosives either over the top in the pass game or in the run game. I really thought Chip Trainum busting a long one could end up being the difference in the game, but they kept him bottled up even though he had 100 and some yards. Not saying they stopped him, but they did enough to keep Toledo at bay. And then in the fourth quarter, again, the defense got jazzed up and made the 2 big plays.
Moving on now, Central Michigan coming into Deutz Perry on Saturday. A Chips team that is 3-3 like BG, 1-1 in the MAC like BG.
Yeah, I think for Central, they come in, physicality is their calling card. Their coach came from Army at West Point, and they are running the ball way more than they're throwing the ball. So this could be a fast-moving game because Bowling Green wants to run it too. So I think the D-line and the front 7 are going to be especially challenged this week. You got to strap it on tight, as they say. It's going to be a head knocker. And I think, 17 points might win this game because there are not going to be that many possessions, so mistakes are going to be amplified as well. I think this one's going to be close to the vest, and BG needs to make sure they take care of all the details.
For the rest of the MAC, is this BG win over Toledo a bit of an eye-opener? Is the Falcons, are they going to be able to sneak up on anybody now?
Well, I think no, they won't be able to sneak up on anybody, but I do believe it also sort of validates the way Coach George wants to play it. Much more old school. This is definitely we run to set up the pass kind of team, and that's not always sexy or attractive to everybody from the outside. And, they came in with just the win over Liberty and the home win over Lafayette, everybody's like, okay, they're all right, but are they really a threat? Well, turns out they are. Even in a game they didn't play particularly well, with their starting quarterback out, they beat their rivals here. So clearly it's an eye-opener.
And you look at the remaining portion of the MAC schedule for Bowling Green, a very manageable schedule. Of course, they do have Buffalo, who is a half game behind Western for the MAC lead right now, but that game is here at the Doyd Perry. So, again, you can't look forward, but at the same time, there is a very clear path to Detroit for this Falcon team.
Yeah, and that's what we look at, the big picture as media. When you looked at the schedule, the first half was much tougher than the second half. They came through the first half about as well as you could hope. Now they can say, hey, there is definitely a way for us to get to Detroit, but now you got to execute each and every week, and that begins with Central Michigan. I think this team is a pretty even-keeled group, though, and Coach George is that way, so I think they'll stay on task. But nothing's a given in the Mid-American Conference, or really any conference. Those games with teams that you've played for years, like upcoming with Kent State and even Akron, and these teams that you just never know, especially when you go on the road. Definitely got to defend home turf, though.
You never know in the MAC. You never know. We're going to see something different, and we saw something different on Saturday. 28-23 win for the Falcons. The first time BG's ever won a game, 28-23. So we did have a scoregami, and it's still up on the scoreboard here at Doyd Perry Stadium. I want to thank Todd Walker, the voice of the Falcons on Bowling Green Radio, for joining us.
Thanks, Mark. Go Falcons.